You know, it's pretty wild to think about how much our world has changed since 1900. I mean, we went from the very first flight to putting people on the moon, from telegraphs to carrying the entire internet around in our pockets. But what if I told you that some of the biggest forces shaping our lives right now were already cranking up over a century ago? In this explainer, we're going to dig into the huge shifts of the last 120 years or so and ask a really big question. How much has truly changed?
Yeah, political scientist Francis Fukuyama just nails it with this quote. This idea of stuff spreading across the globe in an instant, that's not just some academic theory. It's the reason a fashion trend that starts in Seoul can blow up in São Paulo overnight. It's why a new piece of tech from California can totally change how people work in Kenya just a few months later. This is the engine of the modern world we're going to explore.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the scientific sparks that really lit the fuse. Then, we'll see how those sparks created massive social and economic waves. After that, we'll take a hard look at the environmental price of all that progress. And finally, we're going to come back around and really question how new our new world actually is.
All right, let's jump right in. We're starting with the science and tech, the incredible breakthroughs that really kickstarted this whole era of massive change. You can think of these as the sparks that lit the bonfire of the modern world.
And listen, these weren't just abstract ideas for a chalkboard. Understanding the Big Bang completely changed how we see our place in the cosmos. And mastering wave science, that wasn't just for physicists. It was the essential first step toward radio, TV, and yep, eventually that smartphone that's probably in your hand or on your desk right now. Each one of these discoveries wasn't just a new page in a textbook, it was a brand new tool for all of humanity.
And this is where it gets really personal. This is where you see the real human impact. Things like penicillin or vaccines for diseases like polio. These were once basically a death sentence. Developing these things fundamentally changed what it even meant to be human. All of a sudden, you and I could expect to live much, much longer, healthier lives. It was a total game changer.
So here's where we see that pure science get turned into real-world tech that completely rewired the planet. Jet travel didn't just make your vacation easier, it made global business a real thing. Container shipping wasn't just about moving boxes around, it created the complex supply chains we all depend on for, well, everything. And the Green Revolution? It wasn't just about growing more corn. It was the engine that allowed our global population to triple in size.
Wow. This comparison really says it all, doesn't it? Back then, the big promise was just connecting one person's voice to another through a wire. Today, the reality is connecting billions of us to pretty much all of the world's information instantly, from just about anywhere. We didn't just get a better telephone. We got a totally different way of connecting to the world and to each other.
So, what happens when all this new tech crashes into society? Well, it doesn't just sit there quietly. It creates these huge, massive waves of social and economic change that ripple out across the entire globe. The first major ripple was a population explosion. Seriously, fueled by all those medical advances and the Green Revolution, the world's population just skyrocketed. And that, in turn, created brand new social dynamics and some enormous challenges, especially in the developing world. Right, so this population boom really put the pressure on. People started moving around more, which led to new migration patterns, and this thing called brain drain, where highly skilled people leave home for better opportunities elsewhere. But at the same time, a quieter, but maybe even more important revolution was happening. With greater access to birth control and more opportunities opening up, the role of women in many societies began to fundamentally change, and that shifted everything from the size of families to the makeup of the workforce. So economically, countries were scrambling to figure out how to manage this new world. And they tried some wildly different approaches. I mean, just look at the contrast here. You've got Stalin's state-controlled plan, which grew industry but at the cost of horrific famine. Then, decades later, China's Deng Xiaoping did almost the opposite, opening up the economy, which led to explosive growth. It just goes to show you, this has been a century of intense debate about what role the government should play in the economy. And the end result of all these different economic experiments? A huge tectonic shift in global power. For the first time in like 200 years, the world's economic center of gravity started shifting back to the east. Countries like Japan, and then later China and India went from being on the sidelines to being major hubs of manufacturing and innovation, completely redrawing the world's economic map. Now, when you have goods, people, and ideas flying all over the planet like never before, it's pretty much guaranteed to collide with old political systems and create a whole new kind of global culture. Which brings us to our next section. People started organizing in ways that were just unprecedented. From nonviolent resistance in India, to the civil rights movement in the US, to the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa,
Ordinary citizens started using mass protests to demand change on a global scale. And what's really cool is that these movements didn't happen in a vacuum. They inspired and learned from each other, right across the continents.
And then you've got culture. It's easy to think it was just a one-way street, right? With Western culture spreading everywhere. And yeah, Hollywood movies and American music did go global. But so did Indian food, Japanese animation, music from Latin America, and art from East Asia. It was a two-way street. Globalization meant your dinner plate and your music playlist got a whole lot more interesting.
But all of this incredible growth in population, in factories, in air travel, it all came with a price tag. And that brings us to our next topic, the steep price our planet has paid for all this progress.
You know, for most of the century, the story we told ourselves was about conquering nature's limits. We could fly anywhere in a matter of hours. We thought we had endless energy from fossil fuels. We even left the planet. But in doing all that, we created brand new problems on a planetary scale, massive pollution, and a changing climate that we are still trying to get our heads around today.
All right, so after seeing all this incredible, dizzying change, it's really tempting to think that our world today is completely unrecognizable from the world of 1900. But for our last section here, let's ask the question, is that really the whole story?
Okay, I want you to listen to this. You might think I'm reading a description of life today, but get this. This is the famous economist John Maynard Keynes, and he's writing about life before World War I, back in 1914. Ordering stuff from all over the world by phone, hopping on cheap and easy transport to go anywhere. I mean, does that sound at all familiar? What Keynes is showing us is that the world was already deeply globalized, even then. The seeds of our modern world, that instant communication, global trade, easy travel, and even the complicated economic relationships between richer and poorer nations, they were already planted well over a century ago.
So this is the great paradox we're left with, isn't it? The world has changed at a speed and on a scale that would have been totally unimaginable in 1900. No question. And yet, the fundamental patterns of innovation, global connection, inequality, and protest, they feel remarkably familiar. The technology is new, for sure. But are the human stories the same? That's the big question to chew on.